Yeah. Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. I'm a headliner.
Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle here to do part 2 of a video that I started the other day when I talked about the best draft day choices for the 2021 fantasy football season. And I broke down players at every position that were the best draft day choice, not for any other reason than they just finished much higher in the rankings than where they were drafted at. So in this episode, it's all about the worst draft day choices. Now, I did have to kind of maneuver a little bit differently through this video. One of the reasons why is because I didn't want to place guys in this video that were hurt and missed a certain amount of game. So I really tried to stick with about 12 or 13 games played. I tried to stick in that area because if a guy was hurt for a majority of the season, then yeah, it would make sense why they finished so low. I really want to focus on guys that played a majority, if not all of the season, and still underwhelmed compared to where their draft day position was at. So I'm trying to stick with a few of those guys in this video, but I'm going to be covering every single position just like in the other one. But you got to do me a favor before we jump into it. Hit that like button for me. If you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, you got to subscribe, baby. And then at the end of the video, make sure you leave a comment down below and let me know what was your worst draft day choice. And again, try to stick with guys that played an entire season and just underwhelmed. But we are going to kick things off and we are going to start at the quarterback position. And we are going to do that with Sir Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks. Ended up playing 14 out of 17 games this season. And to go along with them, Baker Mayfield, who also played 14 of 17 games this season. Now, Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield, both played a majority of the year, but they both were still, when they came back from injury, were still feeling the effects of it. We know for a fact that Baker was beat up all season long, and then with Russell Wilson, when he came back from missing time, we know that that finger was still an issue for him. You could see it in the offense, you could see it in the way that he threw the ball, you really could see it all over the place. So, unfortunately, with Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield, dealing with injuries all year may have been one of the reasons why they finished so much lower. Now, Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield, their ADPs ended up coming in at quarterback 7 and 14 respectively. So for Russell Wilson, ADP was 50, coming off as the quarterback 7. Baker Mayfield, ADP was 130, coming off as the quarterback 14. Now, again, injuries had a lot to do with this. So if you ended up drafting either of these guys, you found yourself in a position where you were probably struggling at the quarterback position on a weekly basis. Now, Russell Wilson was a guy that drafting him at the beginning of the year a little bit higher seemed about right. Baker Mayfield, love the Bake Show. Okay, I know people don't feel the same way, especially people in Cleveland. I still think that this year, between the injuries and just a change in offensive philosophy for Kevin Stefanski, for whatever reason that was, really led to a lot of the struggles this year. For Baker Mayfield, though, I think what we need to take a look at is what we talked about over the offseason on this channel, where we discussed with Baker Mayfield that we need to understand that he's more of the conductor now. He is not going to be that big playmaker that I think a lot of us thought he could be coming out of college. In this offense, he is better suited in an efficiency type of format instead of a volume type of format where we're hoping he throws the ball over and over and over and over. We're taking what we can get with him. So quarterback 14 always seemed a little bit high for me. There were some guys going behind him that I thought could have some much higher upside than what Baker Mayfield would. Wilson and Mayfield ended up finishing at the quarterback 16 and quarterback 25 spots overall. Again, both of them well with outside QB1 range. If you take a look at their points per game, especially with Russell Wilson, a little bit higher, but because, again, they missed those several games there, they do end up finishing a little bit lower. Now, if they had played every single game, they probably finished higher. But for like Russell Wilson, for example, 9 spots below where you drafted him, man. And a lot of people that drafted him at quarterback 7 drafted him there because they expected higher numbers. If I were willing to bet almost anybody that drafted Russell Wilson, they were thinking to themselves, I've got a guy that's going to finish higher than quarterback 7. I don't think anybody drafted him thinking, yeah, this guy is going to probably end up being a little bit lower, but still a good... No. So you were expecting some higher numbers out of him. You know, with Baker Mayfield, quarterback 14, I think people where they were drafting him were drafting him as more of a backup quarterback, super flex leagues, maybe as a QB2 or 2 QB leagues as a QB2. He wasn't drafted as a quarterback 1 at quarterback 14, but still, if you drafted him, even if it was in one of those 2 QB leagues, you were sorely let down as he finished all the way down at quarterback 25. So he didn't even finish as a quarterback 2 this season, which is a big issue. Moving on to the running back position, I've got Dalvin Cook and Saquon Barkley here for you. Dalvin Cook's ADP coming in at 2 overall is the running back 2 off the board, and Saquon Barkley coming in at 10 overall, running back 9 off the board. Now, there are some other guys that you probably could look at in this area here of running backs and say to yourself, man, you really should have had so-and-so there, or you should have had so-and-so there. There are, again, quite a few guys that probably could have ended up being included in here. But again, I'm looking for guys that ended up playing a majority of the season. Dalvin Cook played 13 games. Saquon Barkley played 14 games. So I'm not going to include a guy like Derrick Henry, who only played 8 games. I'm not going to go that far down on Derrick Henry. Yeah, did he end up hurting you? Yeah, he did, but it is what it is, okay? So when you take a look at those guys, that is the guy that I'm saying, boom, these 2 guys right here, based on where they were drafted, were probably the biggest letdowns overall. Dalvin Cook, again, 2nd overall. Saquon Barkley, 10th overall. Now, Dalvin Cook on a points per game basis wasn't too bad. On a points per game basis, he came in right around 14 fantasy points per game, which put him just a smidge bit higher than this RB 15 overall. But honestly, it was still right in the same arena. He was still right there as the quarterback, or being taken as the running back 2, and for him to just finish as RB 15 overall, and then to finish barely as an RB 1 in half PPR formats, that is not what you are looking for out of your running back. For Saquon Barkley, a guy that was drafted 10th overall in the first round, this was even worse because, yeah, he did only play in 14 games, but the dude finished as the RB 32. You know who had more points than him this year? Devonta Freeman, Sony Michel, Michael Carter, Myles Gaskin. Yeah, all those guys. Saquon Barkley only averaged 9.2 fantasy points per game in half PPR formats. So you spent the 10th overall pick on a guy that didn't even average double-digit fantasy points in any game this season, or over the course of his games this season. That is a tough pill to swallow. That is a tough pill to swallow. When you take a look at what he did, it was very inconsistent. There was no ceiling. It was very hard to get that type of a return on him. For Dalvin Cook, again, a little bit better, right? You did get around 14 fantasy points per game when you were playing him. That's a lot better than nothing, right? It's a lot better than 9, that's for sure. But with those injuries, again, another season where Dalvin Cook is missing games because of an injury. So taking him as like the RB2, it's really, really tough to say, hey, this guy needs to continue to go here. But on the flip side of that, every running back, it seems like over the last couple of years, seems to have been dealing with running back injury issues. So even with Dalvin Cook continuously having those, you say, hey, if I draft him, I need to bet on missing him 4 or 5 games a season maybe, but every other game I'm going to be getting him, it's going to be a banger. You need to be hoping that he is more like RB5, though, on a point per game basis. And of course, draft his handcuff, Alexander Mattison. Make sure you have him just in case. So with these guys, again, Dalvin Cook, RB15, Saquon Barkley, RB32. Really tough bet for both of these guys this season. A.J. Brown and Terry McLaurin are going to be my wide receivers listed here. A.J. Brown playing in 13 out of 17 games. Terry McLaurin playing in 17 out of 17 games. That right there is a big one. He is he was one of only 2 people on this list that I chose that played in all 17 games this season. Now, A.J. Brown, we know he dealt with a little bit of an injury, but there was inconsistencies throughout the season until the final stretch, right? We know at the end of the year, he really had a nice performance to kind of help propel in and through the fantasy football playoffs. That's really what we needed for him, so he showed up when it mattered, but that's going to be some recency bias. People are going to remember those big-time performances at the end of the season, and they may not remember how tough it was earlier in the year. A.J. Brown's ADP came in at 25 overall, making him the wide receiver 8 off the board. Terry McLaurin's ADP came in at 30 overall, making him the wide receiver 10. So both of these guys ended up being drafted right in the same area. Now, A.J. Brown did end up finishing lower than what Terry McLaurin did because, again, all of those games missed. But overall, for what we looked at in the entire season, A.J. Brown coming in at wide receiver 32, Terry McLaurin coming in at wide receiver 25. So at wide receiver 32, A.J. Brown in a half PPR format averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game. Wide receiver 25, Terry McLaurin, averaged 10.3 fantasy points per game. So A.J. Brown, even on the overall basis, finished lower than Terry McLaurin. On a point per game basis, did finish higher. But again, with A.J. Brown, those 11.5 fantasy points per game, still not good enough for a guy that you drafted at the beginning of the 3rd round as a top 10 wide receiver. Again, his 11.5 fantasy points per game was just as much as Michael Pittman, less than Brandon Cooks, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Hunter Renfrow, even Robert Woods, a guy that was just awful to begin the season, had more points per game than what A.J. Brown did. So what we really need to see this coming year with A.J. Brown is, again, get Derrick Henry back and healthy, get this offense back to a run-first offense, and hey, get a healthy Julio Jones on the other side of him. Having a healthy player on the other side, even though Corey Davis hasn't really done anything in his NFL career to make people go, whoa, he was really good for them a couple of years ago on the other side of A.J. Brown. His breakout that season really helped establish A.J. Brown a little bit more and make him one of those big-time wide receivers because people were paying attention to Corey Davis on the other side. This year, if there was no Julio Jones, there really wasn't a whole lot of anybody, okay? And I think people also underestimate the loss of Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith was a big loss for this offense, even though people, have hated on him because from a fantasy perspective, he's never really produced for him. For him just being there, it helped kind of take some of that pressure off and brought some eyes towards him. Terry McLaurin, honestly, it's the whole situation there in Washington. I mean, not having that good of a quarterback. And listen, Taylor Heinicke, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk ill of you, but you're not an NFL starting quarterback. I think you're a good backup quarterback. I think you're a guy that can be well serviced coming in if need be. But I don't believe that you're a guy that we should be throwing in as a starter on a consistent basis. So again, nothing against you, my man, Taylor. I appreciate you, but they need an upgrade, okay? They need an upgrade at the position. Dealing with that offensive line, would have liked to see maybe them perform a little bit better. They were kind of streaky at times this season, it really felt like. So, there was other things outside of Terry McLaurin there that just really didn't bode well. And to begin the season, he actually had a really, really good start to the season. It wasn't anything crazy or high end, and it wasn't anything that you were like, oh yeah, he won me a week. That didn't happen. But what it did do is it did help a little bit of a consistency consistency. Towards the end of the year, he wasn't giving you any consistency whatsoever. Them getting a new quarterback is going to be the biggest thing for Terry McLaurin, getting back to the numbers that he was producing a couple of years ago. The tight end position is going to be really, really tough. And before you jump on me here, I'm going to list Kyle Pitts and Noah Fant, even though I don't 100% agree with Kyle Pitts. And if you watched my in-season videos, you saw me stick up for Kyle Pitts on a regular basis almost every single week. Even though at the beginning of the year, I told you all if you drafted him that high, you were going to be disappointed, okay? I told you all it was going to happen, and I still defended him in season because I don't think he was nearly as bad as a lot of people thought he was. It was all about the touchdowns. The guy didn't score touchdowns. If the guy would have just scored 4 touchdowns on the season, he would have been a top 5 tight end. Easy, okay? And he would have been a lot better on a weekly basis, but the dude just didn't score, and he didn't get those looks in the red zone. So Kyle Pitts and Noah Fant ended up being drafted. Kyle Pitts, 46 overall, is the tight end 4. Noah Fant, 80 overall, is the tight end 8. Now, on Noah Fant's side, Noah Fant was not a guy that I liked before the season. They had Jerry Jeudy, right? They drafted Jerry Jeudy. He's there. They have Courtland Sutton. He's there. They have, Melvin Gordon. He's there. They go out and they draft Javonte Williams. He's there. But it's a little bit as well of the emergence of Albert, are you okay? All right, Albert, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay, Albert? All right, listen. Albert, are you okay? Love me some Albert, are you okay? Dude, he's a guy that can go get the ball, good red zone target, but they utilize him in that offense more and more and more and more as the season went on. And that really, really hurt Noah Fant. It made things difficult for him to really perform on a consistent basis. He had some good games here and there, but he was not good on a consistent basis. Drafting him as the tight end 8, these guys, they didn't really underperform too much. Kyle Pitts finishes as the tight end 7. Noah Fant finishes as the tight end 12. Now for Pitts, tight end 4 to tight end 7, that doesn't seem like a big drop. But again, talking about some of those things that happened this year, he just really underperformed for the most part. I mean, on a weekly basis, people were frustrated with what they got from him, and it was because he was not scoring touchdowns. If he had scored touchdowns, he would have ended up being just fine. But listen, he only ended up finishing 1 point behind Rob Gronkowski for tight end 6, 1 point behind Zach Ertz for tight end 5, and then he finished about 20 points behind George Kittle for tight end 4. And again, if he scores you another 4 touchdowns, he makes up for that right there, and he's tight end 5. He's a lot closer to George Kittle. Those things end up happening. So Kyle Pitts, I'm not going to hate on him too much because it wasn't the volume, it wasn't the receiving yards, it wasn't the receptions, it wasn't even the targets. It was the targets in the red zone and the touchdowns that really ended up hurting his fantasy value. Now, hopefully that they get back, and I don't want to say get back to because they've never targeted their number 1 pass catcher in the red zone because they didn't even do it with Julio Jones. But with Kyle Pitts, getting him those targets in the red zone is an absolute must next season. They need to do it or it was a waste of a draft pick. For Noah Fant, really for me, I'm out on him this year again. There's just no way that I'm going to be able to invest in him when he's got so many receiving options around him. One thing that could end up fixing that is, let's say with Noah Fant, let's say they do get a new quarterback. Maybe part of that trade is trading away a Jerry Jeudy or a Courtland Sutton or something. If something like that were to happen, then I think we need to readjust and look at that and say, okay, we could be doing something differently now. Noah Fant does have a lot more fantasy value this year, and we take a look at him as a much more serious option come draft season next year. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my picks for the worst draft picks of the 2021 fantasy football season. A lot of different players could have ended up showing up here. One guy I didn't talk about in this video, wide receiver Allen Robinson. I wanted to leave him because when Jake and I do our breakdown of our hits and misses for the 2021 season, we'll be talking a lot more about Allen Robinson, so I wanted to save it for that video and pick some other guys to talk about here. But again, before you get out of here, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what player you drafted that you thought was the biggest bust this season. But I'm going to get out of here for now. Hopefully you all stay safe and stay healthy, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. Y'all stuck on third down. Your content's plain Jane. Headliners on top now. We gonna move and change. Podcast off the rip. Draft guide, so legit. Fantasy world, our game tight. You know we about that chub life. Stuck in a rut and you need some motivation. Head to the channel for this Headliner Nation.
I'm a headliner.